Welcome everybody to the second edition of Shaping the City, Forum for Sustainable Cities and Communities, here from Venice in Palazzo Michiel. The forum is organized by the European Cultural Center, and today and tomorrow we are gonna be happy to challenge our speakers with interesting questions about the futures of our cities and our living. But before starting, let us introduce ourselves. My name is Lucia Pedrana, and together with Adi Elaj, we are going to be your hosts for today and tomorrow. For the audience here in Palazzo Michiel, we kindly ask you to keep your masks. If you like to have some water and coffee, there is everything next door. And if you need anything, just ask our staff. At the end of each panel, there is going to be a Q&A session. So if you like to question something, just please go ahead. And for the online audience who is following us on the YouTube channel, please feel free to type your questions in the chat, and our fantastic moderators, Susanne and Ilaria, will bring your questions to the audience. And now, before starting, we would like to show you a short video about the first edition of the forum, which took place in 2018 here in Venice.
What will mean a city tomorrow?
More than 50% of the world's population live in cities.
Getting old is a state of mind.
We, as architects, are responsible.
We need to be careful what we are doing.
We have both something to offer, but also we have a lot to learn from.
This is a challenge.
We created something that now is free to evolve.
This is the first edition of Shaping the City, and we are really happy as European Cultural Center to host it in Venice.
For the very first time, we gathered here in Venice a whole list of architects, urban planners, academics, deans of universities and professors to talk about the cutting-edge urbanization problems that we have in the world right now.
How we shape the city for the future is one of the most important decisions we'll make in the coming decades.
We really need to embrace a new mindset and change our behaviors in a way that we can continue building on efficiencies.
The opportunity is so incredible to design a city that's both sustainable and exciting.
What I'm very encouraged about is this idea of a bottom-up approach to shaping a city, meaning you have to appropriate space, you have to do it yourself.
And we're looking at different perspectives on how cities are formed, who shapes the cities, under what conditions.
Let's go for scale.
So we need to create bigger awareness among people.
I'm interested in moving back through the theme of shaping the city as a way to think about what is already here.
Why we're here? Architects and designers, they don't design shapes. They don't design forms, they design behaviors.
街の形を作ったり、デザインをするだけじゃなくて、人が本当に居心地がいいと思う。
It's the understanding that very many different forces shape the city.
It's very good to see that it's quite a wide range of different perspectives, and it's in a fabulous location. Very exciting for an architect to be here.
The human condition is the very center, the very core of what Shaping the Cities Forum is about.
I think that the duty of architects today is to help people to live better. It's minimum, it's simplistic like that, but it's enough.
On the first day of Shaping the City, we gave the ECC Award for the Universities Project to the North Carolina State University. And on the second day, we gave the ECC Award for Architecture 2018 to Odile Depp.
I feel very honored to receive an award from such an organization.
A as a great opportunity for those architects and universities. They are presenting their work in our exhibition in Palazzo Mora and Palazzo Bembo and the Marina Ressa Gardens, because they can come to Venice and they can directly talk about their work.
We are thrilled to be here in Venice for the Shaping the City Forum this week. This is an opportunity for us to collaborate and see where we might be able to take this. And for that, I want to thank the European Cultural Center.
We hope for the next edition of Shaping the City to gather more speakers from different places across the world in order to engage more in the conversation of how to shape our cities in the future.
So, the venue has changed, but we're still the same. We became a bit older, and we're very happy to have with us in the second edition some of the same speakers as Divina, Ulrich, and Thomas tomorrow. And we'd like to thank also the other speakers who flew all the way: Alan from the US, Apostolos and Nadia from Abu Dhabi, Pia from Helsinki, and of course Ulrich from Germany, and Divina from Lebanon. So for that, thank you. Thank you for being here with us today. So this year's Shaping the City tackles urbanization issues and key different issues across different cities across the world. Shaping the city is a very big statement, but we decided to look at that in 4 different lenses, in 4 different perspectives, in 4 different panels over 2 days. So today, in our first panel, in our first session, it's about reimagining the city. The afternoon panel is about climate change and resilient cities, whereas tomorrow, the first panel is about building through technology, followed by the last panel, which is architecture for the people. Before of that, Lucia.
So to begin the conference, to celebrate our collaboration with Domus, we have the pleasure to have our initial opening keynote speech from Walter Mariotti, the editorial director of Domus. So let's give a warm welcome to Walter, who is connected.
Good morning to everybody, and thank you to all the staff of European Culture Center. We are very honored as Domus to be part of this important moment of reflection and vision, and I'm very sorry not having the opportunity to be there with you, but I hope it will be possible for the next edition. As Domus, we are interested since 1928 envisioning the future of cities through different keys which are generally define architecture, design, and art. But it's evident that in the last years, in the recent past, all these concepts are changing, mixing with different disciplines and other perspectives. Boundaries are cancelled by the development of our societies, our culture, our economy, our geopolitics. For that reason, we devoted a moment. This year will be the 24th of November with a forum which is an attempt to do what the European Cultural Center is doing now, a moment of reflection for all over the world that we call Domus Forum, the Future of Cities. It's evident that in this particular moment, sustainability is one of the major keywords to investigate the future of our societies. And we think to be concentrated about the big lecture of Gio Ponti and the founders of Domus, that urbanism and architecture as a form of design could be still very important to reach this milieu of interest. And for that reason, I prepared a short video that I wanted to share with you and then to make some consideration. So thank you for seeing the video. Guest editor of this new course is Michele De Lucchi, that you all know very well. And then after Michele De Lucchi, we had the opportunity to work with Venice, and then with David Chipperfield, and then this year with Tadao Ando. And now in these hours we are closing the last issue of the year, which is signed by the collaboration with Mr. Ando. And we are, of course, also working for the next guest editor, because in our idea, in our concept, it's important that every year a name, big name, or an interesting name of our time, it's helping us to investigate the future through concepts. And I think that the word that you have seen in the video are very important to rethink, or better to approach the future of sustainability in our society, in our global world, to concepts which make the body of sustainability, which in any other case risk to become a kind of jingle, a kind of marketing strategy to sell products, instead of being a necessary, fundamental key to re-project our life and the way that we approach space, time, existence, and needs. I think that the rebellion, which is not a revolution, is one of these crucial concepts. Rebellions, in our Domus perspective, means not to revolt against the world, but to try to maintain a critical viewpoint about what the markets and the general meaning of this world is trying to sell in us. But after rebellion, another important concept and also viewpoint is the cue. It's evident from any part and from many index that our world is suffering different disease. But one of the biggest disease for us, domus, is that there is no cure, no attention. Cure, it's caring. And a different approach to reality, a different approach to landscape, a different approach to cities, it's for us necessary to rethink the future, especially in that part of the planet where cities are the cities that we have. It's impossible to build new cities before reconsidering the old cities and all their rupture, their brownfields, their interruption that for us are the future of our cities. Another concept that I wanted to share with you and to put to your attention is the concept of silence. And the silence for us, it's not an architectural concept, but is a concept from an experience which was the theater. Silence, it's really related to interpretation. And interpretation is a Latin word from the late tradition. It means the operation that separates the symbols of the world. Silence is fundamental to giving meaning to things and to having a proper relation with things and objects and people. And after silence, I think that the reason is another concept that our architectural and design knowledge has to repeat. Reason because we live in times where many attacks to scientific and Cartesian word and concept are made by different perspectives. I could not say that science is the only way to imagine the future, but definitely science is the paradigm, an open paradigm, that it's still working for the majority of our realities, and I think has to be considered in the proper way. And then another concept that we try to reflect in our approach to architecture and design, it's Eros. For us, Eros, it's a powerful force, and maybe the most powerful force of the universe and man. And I think that Eros is also the power that allowed us to change in any moment our life and our interpretation. I think that Eros is also the energy that leads human mankind to rethink and having the force to get over difficult moments like pandemic, disease that we are still suffering. But also it's an important element to be considered in our personal and individual life. We cannot mention poverty, and we are living a paradox in our society. This paradox is very related to the concept of affluence, that we are living in very affluent, and the model of capitalism that all the world is sharing, it's the model that allowed the majority of people in history to get better conditions for living. At the same time, it's creating new kind of fragility, new kind of poverty, new kind of disease, socially and individually. I think that an architecture and design that not consider this as not the right of citizenship in our cultural milieu. And then evolution. Evolution is a very contradictory word, because evolution is maybe sometimes and more often related to the word progress. And I think that one of the first basic operations that we have to do now is to separate the word evolution from the word progress, and the meaning that we accepted from the last century to today. And then we came to the concept of distance. You know, I know that this could create a lot of debate in an audience like the audience of this morning of professionals and professors and intellectuals related to architecture and design. But I think that the distance is very important as a key to interpret the difference between disciplines. Talking through distance, I could define the relationship between landscaping and approaching urbanism and more approaching architecture and more approaching design as a way to interpret and to make sense to different fields that, as I was telling before, are more and more mixed, more and more combined. And then we are coming to the last two words that I think are very crucial in our times. One is diversity and inclusion. Diversity is one of the fundamental pillar words for our investigation of Domus activity, but also my personal reading, also for the reality. I think that diversity is the missing concept in the last historical development of the human knowledge. And now it's time to make justice of that, introducing this in all the different systems in our life. And then we want to end about chaos. After that effort, after that research, after that path that passed through this concept at Domus, we are very acknowledged and very conscious that the chaos is reigning at the beginning of our universe, and maybe one of the theory is that the chaos will become the future of our, I hope, long final exit. So if the cosmos is the introduction and the trying to reading the chaos and to ordinate and regulate the chaos, we have to be aware that we have to do our best, we have to use all the tools elaborated by our civilization, by other civilization, by science and different approach, but we cannot substitute to God, we cannot substitute to the universe, and maybe as many philosophers thought, we have to follow the universal will. So with that, I hope these 2 days of meetings in Venice will be fruitful and powerful in helping us in this path. And as editorial director of Domus, I want to thank you for your attention and to giving you our best greetings for your work, and hoping to see you soon in Venice, to European Cultural Center, or maybe in Milan, where Domus keep looking at the world and bringing the world. Thank you very much.
Grazie Walter. Thank you very much for your inspiring words, which will guide us through these 2 days of conference. And tomorrow, to wrap up the conference, we are going to have a closing keynote by Javier Arpa Fernandez, who is also here with us today. So we are very happy about it, and let's start.
Thank you, Lucia. So indeed, within these 2 days, as Walter said, we are planning to recognize the significant role that urban planning and design will play in molding the cities of the future. So without further ado, we will start with the first session, which is Reimagining the City. So this session presents the dynamic process of transformation in our cities, where the spatial and the built environments are constantly changing. It explores the morphological dimensions, engulfing both the architectural and the urban dimensions at the same time, by focusing on the technological, sensory, and experiential qualities in architecture and the distinctive qualities in the urban space. So for that, I would like to introduce our moderator, Alan Sayer. Alan, first, thank you for coming all the way from Boston. Alan is an associate professor in practice of architecture and technology at the Harvard University GSD Graduate School of Design, and he is the director of REAL, the Responsive Environment and Artifacts Lab at Harvard. Alan is also the principal of Envivia, an award-winning global design firm. So I'd like to also draw your attention to one thing, that Alan today in the afternoon at 7 is launching his book, which is called Responsive Environments. It's an interdisciplinary manifesto on design technology and the human experience. So make sure to be in Palazzo Mora at 7 for the book launch of Alan. And Alan, the floor is yours, and thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. Just a slide clicker is, oh, sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Hadi, again for inviting me, and I'm very happy to be here to moderate this panel, which is, so briefly I'm going to tell you how it's going to work. I will be starting with a short presentation, followed by with my colleague who's going to join over Zoom. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here. Stefano Andriani from REAL. And then followed by our presentation, which is going to be a joint presentation. We're joined with Apostolos Kyriazis from Abu Dhabi University, who is an assistant professor there. And he's giving a joint presentation with Nadia Munajjid, again from Abu Dhabi University, who is an assistant professor of architecture. Following this presentation, we're joined with Ulrich Giemann from Ideal Spaces Working Group, and he's the head of Ideal Spaces Working Group. Following that, we have Pia Fricker from Aalto University, School of Arts, Design and Architecture, and she's a professor and vice head of Department of Architecture. And last but not least, we're joined with Divina Bujaudi. She's an architect, assistant professor, head of architects at the Order of Architects and Engineers in Lebanon. So we will have about 12 minutes for each presentation, and then we'll have a discussion, and we're going to open it for questions and answers. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions that are coming online. We have a group of people here, but I think we're joined more virtually. So this panel is Reimagining the City. How can we reimagine cities? How can we dream about the ideal city? What are the driving forces that make a city livable and respond holistically to the human condition? We may need new technologies and innovations that are faster and superior and smarter, but often it takes a global pandemic, forced migrations, revenge of nature, or a mega explosion in the heart of a vibrant city to become a catalyst of reimagining the city. The fact of the matter is we always need to rethink and imagine ideal cities, and we need to deal with how the built environment is going to respond to many of the issues that we are facing today. Cities are organic and dynamic bodies that grow and shape over millennia. The most beautiful of them are often the ones that have repeated layers and history of wars, misery, and suffering endured by its citizens. And then, just like magic, a city like Venice turns into this beautiful, romantic place where every corner is extraordinary and just right. Being here in Venice, it is very easy to see the beauty and not to think about every little struggle on every corner that shaped this place. So one proven way of imagining a beautiful city is to wait 1,000 years and to have history do its layering business. But seriously, how can we do this? When we are told to be smart, and of course one popular idea is smart city that everybody talks about, and this idea caught on, although no one seems to agree with what the definition of a smart city is, but we know it means using technologies and sensors to optimize and make people's lives better and easier. So perhaps technology is the answer to think about post-COVID cities that are climate resilient and inclusive and respond to all of our needs. Paul Virilio, the French philosopher, said, "Every technology carries its own negativity, which is invented at the same time as technical progress." I quote, "When you invent the ship, you also invent the shipwreck. When you invent the plane, you also invent the plane crash. When you invent electricity, you invent electrocution. And now when you invent social media, you invent, I don't know what we invented, we're still figuring that out." It is very true, technological innovation is ever outpacing human understanding and comprehension. To understand modern and smart city technology is key, but it is going to take a true understanding of what technology does to human behavior and experience to avoid cities that are shipwrecks. To give an example, a simple example, one of the issues with the systemic thinking employed with smart cities overlooks the human side of urban living, which poses the danger of making urban spaces less interesting and more repetitive, and completely limiting the extraordinary. The key is to balance technological advancement and connect to the human condition that is multi-layered and multifaceted. This is going to bring me to the research that we do at the Responsive Environments and Artifacts Lab. Slides. Okay. And this is the book that Hadi mentioned. The research looks at how the entanglement of physical with the digital spaces is constantly creating new types of hybrid experiences and realities with a profound impact on the social, cultural, and economic dynamics of our living environments. At the individual level, the ubiquitous presence of technology in our everyday lives, our relationships with the surrounding environments. These transformations pose unprecedented challenges and yet offer novel opportunities for designing the built environment, from artifacts and spaces to building and cities. By unpacking the experience of technologically mediated spaces, the work at the Responsive Environments and Artifacts Lab, REAL, presented as a form of a manifesto in this book, suggests an alternative approach to the design of interactive, stimulating, thought-provoking, and meaningful built environments. In so doing, it recognizes the all-pervasive nature of technology and sets the ground for redefining and reframing the concept of responsive environments across the disciplines of architecture, urban design, and the human-building interaction. So the way conceptually the research and the book is, or this manifesto is organized, it's an interplay of three concepts: situations, experiences, and interactions. Situations are the spatial, social, and infrastructural phenomena in our built environment that are affected by advanced technologies. In these multi-scalar situations, people are intertwined with urban systems and are involved with the city's solid substrate through their everyday activities. In this chapter, concept, chapter 2, for example, we introduced the concept of urban glitch, which is an unexpected slippage of the system functioning in a technologically driven urban environments. An urban glitch disrupts the functionality and effectiveness of a city dynamics. In doing so, it encourages designers to imagine and develop responsive artifacts, buildings, and environments that foster creativity, open up spaces otherwise unexplored, and lead to transformations throughout the whole city. Through this lens, urban glitches can ultimately spark the design to technologically enhance built environments that are able to outwit their own smarts, thus creating the conditions for post-smart cities or responsive environments. The effective integration of technology unlocks opportunities for the design of performative intelligence systems as well as creative short circuits that leverage mistakes, unexpected errors, Here, this technological integration of great importance, not only for immediate spatial responses, but also, and most importantly, for the long-lasting impact of urban and architectural design interventions that are enabled by technology. Experience, so the second concept is experiences. And experiences are technologically mediated conditions of the built environment that affect the individual at both experiential and behavioral level. If architecture is the art of articulation of space, in the words of Umberto Eco, it is also a form of social and cultural expression through the comprehensive physical design of spatial as well as perceptual conditions. The subjective connection between the form and perception is crucial for creating places that resonate with us and for designing meaningful experiences. At these intersections, mediated interplays foster augmented relationships between the individual and the collective. Through the creation of hybrid realms, site-specific projects enhanced by creative use of artificial intelligence and interactive technologies affect the ever-changing ways in which people relate to one another and to the spaces around them. And finally, interactions are the human-centered opportunities for design to shape our surrounding environment through novel human-machine interfaces. Digital interactions is not meant to replace physical interaction in tangible spaces. Instead, this concept highlights the active role of the subject-object duality situated within augmented context and mediated by intelligent artifacts. Here, the use of sensing technologies and kinetic systems allows us to shape constantly changing spaces that respond to people's dynamic behaviors and needs. Through these relationships with artificial, we may discover again what it truly means to be human. So this is the exhibit that Hadi mentioned that we will be having at 7 p.m. today, and I invite you all to be there. And now, to go into the details of these three concepts, basically, we'll be joined with my colleague, Stefano Andriani, who's going to walk us through these three concepts. Yeah.
Very good. Let me share my screen. All right, very good. So, first of all, apologies for not being there with you today. This morning I wanted to go over a little bit some. also outdoor issues. So there is one challenge is
dici che male funziona. Il male il suono di YouTube, di Zoom.
Instead of watching us, instead of controlling us, instead of talking about surveillance, we talk about safety in a very human scale level, in a very informal way, as if the drone was a friend of us, as if the drone was an object that we know it's there, and we know can behave in a different ways in order to help us navigate the environment more safely. Typically, these concepts are always developed in our class, in our lab, together with prototypes in order as a proof of concept and simulations. So these are working prototypes developed by our students. So these little drones that really work with you when there are you don't feel safe in the street. So the last concept I wanted to bring on the table today is more about how we experience our surrounding environments, how we interact with our surroundings, and how we can quantify, how can we measure these perceptions, these experiences, in order to better inform design decisions. So this idea of trying to capture hidden aspects of the built environment in order to offer designers some data or different measurements that typically are not part of our design toolkits. So we are used to design with certain tools, but it's very difficult to design an environment in order to calibrate experiences or in order to embed certain elements of our sensorial experience within streets or within interior space. So we have been working on this research project for a few years now. Actually, this goes back to, I believe, 2015, 2016, and we were one of the first labs, I believe, to start employing wearable tools such as eye trackers or EEG scanners outside typical labs, indoor labs, outside to the built environment in order to trying to capture some of those qualities. So this is one of those experiments where with our students, we have tried to quantify how people perceive the surrounding environment in terms of visual inputs. So eye tracker now, you have seen, I'm sure, many studies around, but again, this is one of the first ones that attempted to measure where the eye is looking at in order to have a picture of what are the objects that more capture user in comparison with how the mind works and what we believe we have seen in the environment. A similar study was done through EEG scanner, which is an instrument that you put in your head and attempts to measure your emotional state. So if you're happy, if you're sad, if you're excited, and so on. And again, typically you wear this tool in an indoor controlled environment, but we took it also out in the actual space and measured how we experience our urban space through different modes of transport and what is the emotional impact of different aspects of the space through these different modes of transport. And we have used not only with our students EEG, but other instruments such as proximity sensors. And then we analyzed and overlapped data of different instruments in order to somehow draw a new taxonomy of the built environment, which is not based on the way which we typically think of our cities, the square, the streets, the park or the green areas, but it's more about how we perceive the environment. What is our emotional response to the environment? So this is an ongoing work. There is a lot to explore, but we are very happy to continue. And we believe there is a lot to learn from these experiments in order to grow the toolkits of designers. So I want to end with this quote by another colleague, another contributor of the book, that said that perhaps one of the tasks of design is to modulate, to tweak, to modify our surfaces of engagement with space. So to hack the world and our perception of it. So the research projects that I just show you, I believe, go into that direction. How we can, yes, quantify our surroundings, but then once we learn how we experience it, how can we leverage the data in order to inform the design or to hack our surfaces of engagement with the urban environment. Thank you.
Stefano. And the floor is now to Apostolos and Nadia.
Well, first of all, on behalf of Apostolos and me, we want to thank the ECC and Hadi and Lucia very much for inviting us. We're coming from Abu Dhabi, and we're going to be talking about reshaping the city or reimagining the city in the context of UAE cities and Gulf cities. So how do I get... So basically, our discussion today with colleagues here and everyone is mostly inspired from our own teaching practice, whether individual, separate, or collaborative. And we have also a show as part of the Biennale's exhibition. So we will be participating actually in Palazzo Bembo with Studio 5, which is the vertical studio or high-rise studio. But today also what we're bringing in is again partially inspired by our individual research and collaborative research. So we want to reflect on the nature of how the Gulf cities are actually developing. And many of you, hopefully, who have been seen maybe at least the pictures or who had the chance to visit, they would have maybe noticed the accelerated and extremely fast development in the Gulf. So whether we are able to reshape or discuss reshaping a city that is already being constantly reshaped only in the past 50 years is a question. We barely get the chance to reflect. It's a machine, basically. When we're asked to teach the studio on high-rise, and it becomes even more challenging because the students are faced with this reality, and we want to be somehow critical in this context, thinking about issues like social cohesion, walkability, etc. So one thing maybe we thought about to start is really to kind of go back to the origin, and not really in a way to be retro or to go to cliches, but rather to think about the existing landscape or the original landscape and how they kind of work together or contradict each other. So you might think or see Dubai, the shiny tall buildings against a horizontal, very, very striking landscape. The Gulf obviously is dominated by a very strong horizontal landscape. I mean, dominated by the desert, but also the kind of very strong relationship between desert and water, because it's also, Abu Dhabi, for example, is almost an island, and it has many islands. So it's an interesting kind of contradiction in terms of materials, but also landscapes. The image on the left here is showing Al Ain, which is a city that is a little bit less developed. It's more kind of consistent with the local sensitivities and urban settlements. And it's appearing actually from the mountains, so maybe this is an image that is not very much the image that you would see naturally about the Gulf and the emerging city. But it gives clues about the horizontal developments that have always existed in this area. And Al Ain actually is mostly populated by local people versus Dubai and Abu Dhabi, which is mostly expats and migrants. So again, I think we have been trying to kind of almost live with this kind of constant fluctuation of how the nation-building project that has started maybe 4 decades ago, or 5, let's say, they're going to celebrate 50 years this year, has been also very much inextricably linked to the fluctuation of oil prices and the relationship also by how maybe financial crisis of 2012, you see all the cranes that have suddenly, I mean, it's a pause in this kind of construction machine. We're also experiencing something similar now with the kind of depletion of oil resources. So going back to the keynote speakers' questions about sustainability, social cohesion, etc., I think there's a lot of talk about sustainability. Now Expo 2020 is under the big title of Sustainable Future, and there could be maybe skepticism around that, whether it's just sustainability in terms of environmental sustainability, or do we need to look at social, cultural, and other aspects of sustainability. So again, the development of the urban fabric has, in the past, I think if we look back at the very, very old settlements, pre-oil, it's been mostly very, very kind of organic in its form. The communities, actually, this is a place that exhibits historically great resilience because of the climate condition, because of the, obviously, the survival that they had to go through, and the material culture, even though it might not be as big in terms of source, but talks about a community that has been quite homogeneously living together, that forms of arts that are based on performance, very oral in their nature and very collaborative, actually, as a local community. Those also who know a little bit about the Arab culture and the culture of the Gulf know about the poetry, which is, has been extremely connected to the lexicon of the existing landscape, like desert, etc. So, and the sense of resilience that comes with it, and even sustainability and, social cohesion. Slowly, with the development of the oil, which has, the discovery of the oil and the beginning of this kind of boom, those are two suburbs in Abu Dhabi. So you're not seeing really the downtown, you're seeing really the suburbs, and this part of the city is very much, the urban fabric is kind of based on a cell, which is the family cell, and mostly they live in villas, and the villas are fenced. So obviously it's kind of like this sudden enclosure that has happened, and a migration even of the local community to the suburbs to kind of regain their contact, if you want, with nature versus the downtowns that are mostly, inhabited and occupied by the migrant communities. So we're looking at that, and we in our teaching even we talk about those kind of tall towers that have become another representation or interpretation of this exclusivity of this kind of enclosure that's often happening with no connection anymore amongst the communities. There is an interesting moment with the modern, the emergence of the grid-based urban planning that happened in Abu Dhabi in the 70s, and the beginning of the establishment of schools, stadiums, and mid-rise beginning of kind of starting to see a slightly kind of break with the horizontal landscape with those kind of mid-rise concrete buildings. And this is an interesting moment. A lot of discussion is happening on this moment of kind of beginning of modernism, because it's actually started to introduce urbanity to people, and a certain livability between even the migrant groups that have come to the city. So this is actually quite an interesting place to walk around. It's quite walkable, and it kind of portrays a multiplicity and diversity of communities that live there. Just for those who are not very familiar with the UAE, there are some really striking numbers in terms of the growth of population. If you look at it, today it's almost 10 million. The population, but you have only 11% out of them are local. So we're talking about 90 almost % of people who are non-local and who are always changing, because people don't go there and just live forever. So it's kind of, this puts even more pressure on social cohesion. How do you bring communities together? How do they live together, etc. And actually the numbers are even more striking. If you look before the oil, like around 60, it's actually 100 times the population. It has, multiplied 100 times. So it's really an unbelievable number. If you look also at the structure of the groups, you see that, for example, there are some marginalized groups like seniors who are only 1%. If you compare it to the US, for example, it's 20%. So the youth is a good number. Under 30% will jump immediately. So here it's only under 24% of 25, almost quarter. But actually, if you really calculate up to 30 years, then you will have a high rise of this percentage. So the majority is really working people who are coming from everywhere and trying to kind of live together. And then suddenly we start to see, I mean, this is Dubai, and this is one of the interesting natural, obviously, you know that in the Gulf also there's the mangroves, there are different kind of ecosystems, not only the desert. And this is one of the preserved areas, Al Khor, it's called, and we can start to see the beginning of those vertical clusters appearing in the background. So again, this kind of contrast between the horizontal landscape and the vertical landscape, and these kind of disconnected vertical clusters that has started to appear. It's important to note also that the UAE actually accounts to, I think, around 63% of the Middle East tall towers, and only in a very few, so more than half of the Middle East towers have been constructed in the UAE. So it's an amazing number if we're looking at its size. But also, we want to kind of start to look at its impact on, creating a livable community. So this picture shows the reality, maybe what we see sometimes. But, I mean, the image of Dubai that comes is not necessarily always the real image. In reality, really, there's a huge disconnect that is mainly formulated by infrastructural landscape, and those infrastructural landscape almost driven by the vehicular access, now the metro also, vehicular routes, huge highways, roundabouts, bridges, that actually, if we look only at Sheikh Zayed Road, which is this main street, cuts through Dubai. Obviously, for someone who's coming from the old town and coming up from the tunnel and then seeing this kind of parade of towers is really impressive, but the reality is that it cuts the river in half. Cuts the city in half just like a river. So it's almost impossible to cross this street, and it's another form of dividing the city. So those infrastructural landscape kind of act almost, present almost like a constructivist, if you want, form of the city. It also talks, I mean, talking about Virilio again here, about this, time-space relationship and complete kind of transformation of patterns of movability, interaction within the city. So this is part of how we start to look at the city, and we try to kind of pinpoint those issues in our teachings about kind of maybe promoting a sense of informality, inclusivity, diversity, hopefully sustainability also in this part. So can you continue from here?
So continuing on explaining a little bit about the context, we like calling Abu Dhabi an instant city. Only 50 years of contemporary history are celebrated this year, and this includes both buildings, the built environment, and people, as Nadia said before, who on their vast majority are expatriates and are coming to the UAE and most of these countries in the Gulf on a labor visa relationship that forces them to leave immediately when their contract ends, meaning a completely different approach on how the city changes constantly and extremely fast, on an extremely fast pace. Abu Dhabi used to be an island at the top of the image, as you can see, maybe at the center of the image, but has very fast, on a very fast pace, spread through the desert, due south, spreading all the way to the red dotted line that you can see here. We are experiencing a spread towards the desert, against the desert. It's one of the two fronts that Abu Dhabi and Dubai are spreading against. The other is the sea, through those island reclamations that we see very often, which carry another topic and another significance too, how environment, both built and natural, are contradicting each other. So we keep talking on our studios on the horizontal aspect, the desert, the sea, the horizon, the open, and vertical. And we try those relations on the high-rise buildings. The verticality of those cities is so striking at sometimes that their individuality is ever present and so easy to distinguish, either through the tower themselves or through their thresholds with the rest of the city, the skyline and the streetscape. And these are 2 points that we always like to stress, to focus our attention on, especially on my side, on the streetscape, and that emphasize on that individuality. For this, I recently launched a book containing a latest study on how public spaces work in Abu Dhabi in particular, and how formal and informal activities and behaviors are mapped through different public spaces of the city. We encountered 14 public spaces, both formal and informal. We mapped them together with students of both our university and Sorbonne University as well. And we managed to have a thorough behavioral mapping, similar to the work of William White at the past and many others that came after him, and on a very detailed and meticulous daily plan in order to be able to depict as well as possible all practices and behaviors, both formal and informal, on different times of the day, different days of the year, different religious festivals that are applied there and lead to a completely different set of behavior. Through that, we saw we encountered certain behaviors, and we came up to certain conclusions of how public spaces on a city, considering Abu Dhabi, a city that is so meticulously and detailed, planned and detailed in terms of their guidelines and manuals that everybody has to follow, a city that is somehow translated into a surgery room, how informal urbanism and informal behavior comes to fill in gaps between buildings, between streets, and show the lives, the daily life, and its importance to the thresholds of the public space and the private space, horizontality and verticality. It shows communities that come together after work to meet and greet, to to communicate and socialize and spread words of what happens back at their own countries. It shares ideas of how they can adapt to a car-dominated city, to a monopoly of infrastructure and surveillance. It comes as a response to neoliberalism, and how neoliberalism and all the practices of real estate and our economies today respond to inclusive cities and the right to the city, the right to sport, the right to access our waterfront. It is extremely important in places like Abu Dhabi, which is an island, and with many more islands around, to see that in action, how from one day to another things change, and in favor usually, unfortunately, of the big corporates and the big developers. We have seen how this affects the urban morphology and how the urban morphology reflects back to the behavior of people through the podiums at the skyscrapers, through the superficiality of the villas, as Nadia said before, and the corridors in between, and the public spaces that emerge through them. So this is what we were trying to explore, even though the high-rise building as an object somehow is difficult to sometimes express those dualisms but we were able to redefine those boundaries and keep debating about them, how the street interface works, how informality is trying to break boundaries and create those porous, somehow passages and conditions in order for people to and buildings to be able to talk to each other. We have been able to communicate and talk about inclusive architecture and inclusive public spaces that are highly active, program-free, and because of that, very responsive to change and highly adaptable. You want to continue after that?
No, I guess it's just the last two images. I mean, the one before, I think, talks briefly about also the informality or the formal representation of bodies, you know. So here you can see the kind of highlighted body, the gaze, the highly mediated space also versus the invisible body. So I think those images kind of try to also show what is the intention versus what people actually do, because this is also the one on the right. I used to see this bridge every day from my house, and it's actually just next to a real bridge, you know, a vehicular bridge. So people would just follow this path for some reason. They found it to be more walkable. For some reason, they were completely ignoring the other one. The other one is really just repeating what Apostle was saying about those pockets of skateboarding that started to actually be visible. Youth has started to have a lot of attention recently in the UAE with many initiatives, institutional initiatives. And we start to see many skateboards. I mean, in Abu Dhabi alone, like 6 skateboards that have emerged in the last 2 years. And they kind of provide new spaces of inhabitation and socialization, which is just the beginning, I think, for something that hopefully will be much bigger. So, yeah, I think that's it. We can stop here. Do you want to do anything?
No.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. To do this, I think it's your turn.
Ulrich?
Yep. In the meantime, I want to introduce our group, in the name of which I'm presenting. We are the Idle Spaces Working Group, a foundation, newly founded in 2016, a group of international experts from different fields. And our concern is the ideal space in the sense of an imagined space, as well as in the more common sense of an ideal space, of an perfected space, a desired space, even utopian space. We deliberately combine these two notions of what is an ideal space. And here in this presentation, I just wanted to highlight a few points which in our opinion are crucial when we are speaking about a reimagination of the city. So just some basics to be considered, and even to be considered in the background of our daily work on more concrete projects. So this is here the intention, to highlight these backgrounds. We have the reimagined city as an ideal space. Also, qua intention, if we consequently try to reimagine cities, we arrive at the idea and at notions and at concepts of what an ideal city is in our understanding. Our understanding means in the people who are working out the future ideal city, in the people's mind who in the end are allowing and paying, and the people in power who make it possible to make an ideal space or an ideal city at all. And this is a very tricky relation. Here we introduced as an exemplary case, as a symbolic case. This is one core of our work in the Idle Spaces Foundation, how how certain ideas and histories of ideas and basic assumptions, culture-specific basic assumptions and their changes over time, of course, how they are expressed in symbolic terms in the respective spaces. And this is important for the understanding a symbol, and this is a not academic distinction. This is really essential to understand space in our opinion. A symbol is more than just a representation. A symbol is the full presentation of something else which is not fully shown. For instance, if you see, this is from our 2016 exhibition called Ideal Spaces here in Palazzo Mora with the ECC. This is an ideal city from Leonardo da Vinci, at the end of the 15th century, and what we see in a symbolic space and what we explicitly try to line out here are the symbolic properties of this space. So we see, in fact, a modernist space at the end of the 15th century. And we see a certain kind of rationality. The Greek would have said a certain meaning, a general logic and logos applying to the urban space as such. And here we see an ideal city for, that is this question, for which kind of human being? Because this is an ever-occurring question in our work with projects and symposia, which kind of architectures we make for which kinds of human beings. And this is a very important question, very often neglected, despite we have an unthought known as some theories in the back of our heads, or not even theories, just images, like an idea is originally an image. We have just images about the human beings who have to populate these ideal cities, no matter if smart or not. These are important but secondary questions. First of all, it's about the assumption as such. And therefore, I wanted to show as an intro, as this Da Vinci ideal city, due to its pre-modernist character. So here we have it, brought to its symbolic essence, what will come later. Okay. We have some crucial aspects, not all aspects, of course. These are just some. When we have a reimagined city, we have to speak about, as I indicated, about the human condition, as in classical terms, the conditio humana. And the conditio humana has two general domains. The one domain are the concrete conditions in which humans are living in the respective locality, in the respective time. All right. On the other hand, this other domain of the conditio humana are these very basic assumptions I mentioned. These are the theories, the images in the backs of our mind, what a generalized human condition could be. There is no such thing as a generalized human condition. On scientific perspective, of course, it's impossible. We have not the human being, but in praxis, and my former praxis was to be active in government consultancy in large projects, we all have these theories, these basic assumptions. What is the general human being? And this is expressed in architecture. If we understand architecture not just as the physically, visibly built space, but also as organization in broader terms. For instance, the architecture of an organization of hierarchy, the architecture of an international corporation, we do not see it. So the buildings are just a symbolical expression of this architecture behind, so to say. The social architecture and the ideal city and the reimagined city always has to do explicitly or not with this conditio humana and this invisible architecture. What is the social architecture? What we plan or intend as good for human beings. For which human beings? For which kind of conditio humana? These are the questions I try to outline here in this slide. Our imaginations about the ideal city are strongly depending on these human conditions, on these assumptions about the generalized human conditions, not about the specifica. The specifics we can work out, no? Methodically and scientifically or not, and so on and so on. Yeah? But the general mindset behind it, what is a human being? And this is again the question, which kinds of architecture we plan for which kinds of human being. The invisible architectures of the social organization included. Okay. The next point as an example. This is from everyday life. Okay. It's better. Okay. I try. This is... No, if you hear me, it's okay. Huh? Okay. Now I try. Okay. Yeah. It's the people in Abu Dhabi saying, "Mashallah," you know. Otherwise, I try without. If you can understand me, okay, good. Interruption. Okay. Yeah. This is highly context dependent.
Oh no, it's very fine.
Okay.
No, it's not gonna work.
I tried without.
Is it fine like that?
No. May I make a proposal?
Wait.
Forget about it. Yeah. I need it.
Use this one? Wait a moment.
You can hear me? Yeah, you can hear me? Okay, good. Here, this is an example of a conditio humana, and just to show or to reveal, it's not an academic concept. It's a basic understanding. This is from a wall on a large street. I do not remember where it was, in Berlin. No? And gewachsen auf Beton means we have been, also the portrait, we have been grown up in an environment of the concrete. And the conditio humana, and this is the general point, is an image of the human. Also coming back to these basic assumptions. No? Okay. So here we have a comparison. If we apply now these basic assumptions about the human condition, the conditio humana, on different built spaces, as mentioned, these spaces as symbols for ideas behind them. Majorly ideas, what is a good human being and what is a good environment for human beings, for these good human beings. And this is the classical point of architecture as relates to ideal spaces. On the left side, we have an ideal space from the Renaissance. This is beautiful in my eyes. This is from Domenico di Bartolo from Siena, and he made it around 1440 or so. It shows an ideal city full of life. It is teeming with life, and in this ideal city, also the people are building still, and we have remnants from the medieval ages in the background. Also this octagonal structure, and in the foreground we have the new architecture for the new hoped for human being in the Renaissance. No? And you see the people walking in the street. There are noblemen with their horses. On the right side there are masons making a new building. Also, it symbolizes it's a city in growth. It is hope for progress, and also it is hope for a human scale. On the right side, we have a modernist ideal space, also from our 2016 exhibition. This is the modernist version. These are individual paradises in these quadrants, by an encompassed format of a grid. It's not about grids or architectural grids as grids. It's about a symbol of it. We have the individual, smaller communities in a large grid. And this is a total different mindset if you compare it with the ideal space on the left, with this Renaissance city. And this is nothing to do with technology. It is independent from that. So the Renaissance ideal city could be, in a positive sense, be enriched with smart city elements. It is another kind of space. From the mentality, it's another kind of space. And this is the very issue we have to consider when we are speaking about reimagining cities, on the base of which assumptions we are reimagining cities. So, a next point of these imaginations relate to cultural heritage. Cultural heritage relate, again, inter alia, also not exclusively, to a certain core of basic assumptions. We call it the cultural lead ideas and have other names for them. But the point is, a certain culture, and a certain culture means also a certain culture in a certain epoch. For instance, a so-called Occidental culture. There is no such thing like a generalized Occidental culture, but it's a larger cultural sphere. And an important subculture here, for instance, is the culture of the so-called modernity. This is a complete different extra culture. So this means cultural space, if you adopt this concept of the cultural space. And here we are confronted with myths, with cultural heritage, also with elements, with ideas and basic assumptions coming from other epochs. In our Occidental case, we have this myth of the paradise lost and the paradise regained. Again, either explicit or implicit. For instance, explicit, Mies van der Rohe, a modernist architect, said, with a little effort and combination of work, full efforts of people, and with a little goodwill, we would be able, Mies van der Rohe, we would be able to build paradises for all. And here we have this symbolic idle space expression. It has been a graffiti in a Bavarian city anywhere on a wall. And we see a kind of world mountain of trash with some crowny consumer product on the top of it, as like a modernist ziggurat, an unwilling ziggurat. And here they're saying, as we were given paradise, people. No? As for rethinking cities, we have it in the background of our minds, the red letters. No? Just example. Okay. As mentioned, the base of a cultural heritage are myths. What is a myth? A myth is a holy and therefore true tale, and not vice versa. No? And the myth is more than just a story. It's a tale. It narrates about the position of the human being in the universe, no matter how this universe is in the respective case and how the human being is, and the meaning of this human being and the history of this human being, how this world as we know it has been generated via evolution, and how is our position as humans in this generated and evolved universe, no matter how the universe is looking in the concrete case. No? And this is the very essence of a myth. No? And for instance, if you read a beautiful work from Joseph Campbell about mythology, for instance, it is fantastic. And we have also modern myths, and we have myths. Also, myths are not confined to former ages. No? Modernity was full of myths. No? Recent myths from a modernist origin, for instance, and related to reimagined cities, we have to reunite nature culture. This was an old mental major stream, lead idea that natura and cultura, so nature and culture, are different entities. So this is an Occidental core cultural heritage. No? And if we look at these green city approaches, these recent green city approaches, of course there is the pragmatic ecological need in the context of climate change, no doubt. But in addition, we have this old nature-culture debate to be reconciled now with concepts and technologically based and improved cities which become green. Here, the music hope is nature and culture are no longer opposites. They can be united, reunited, repacified, if you want. We have the paradise regained with this ideal concept of the green city. The next myth is the free market, and this is decisive for our socio-cultural ecosystem in toto. The myth of the free market, as I experienced it in praxis in my former government consultancy business, the myth of the free market brought to its core is free market equals democracy equals freedom. Yes, point. No? And due to this free market myth, no, we make cities, for instance, we make cities in real terms, and this leads to results, because every myth is generating, not creating, it's not a deliberate act, it's generating the realities suited to that myth. And if we believe in the myth of the free market, we will have the cities according to that myth. For instance, as described as splintering urbanism phenomena, in the wake of a neoliberal free market version as a new reality of this free market myth. The next myth is the myth of the liberated individual. This is also core of Occidental cultural heritage. The conditio humana of the ideal, of the good, of the human being is to be liberated from constraints, liberated from malaise, liberated from other kinds of confinements. This is a typical Occidental conception of how an individual should be, you know? And as an ideal. And you can imagine what happens if this myth of the liberated individual relates with the myth of the free market. Which kind of environments will result in evolutionary terms? Okay. So the city reimagined, any kind of reimagined city relates eo ipso, per se, to utopia. It is, and this is not meant critically or bad. It's an utopia, literally the utopos, as from its Greek origin, the utopos, the utopia. The utopos is a place which does not exist now. It could have existed in the past, in a golden age, perhaps, or it will exist in the future. And for the trope of the reimagined city, the utopia is in the future, of course. This is one meaning of utopia as non-place, literally translated of utopos. The other meaning is an utopos, a non-place, is a place where human beings cannot live if they want to remain human beings and not just any kind of beings. An utopos could be a place in a dystopian sense where humans cannot exist à la longue. It's impossible for them. These are two meanings of the utopia, and every consideration about reimagined cities relates to utopia, willingly or not, deliberately or not. We have to deal with our assumptions about the human condition, the conditio humana, and we have to deal with utopia. We have two utopias as practical examples. We have this back to nature in a modernist version. So this is the first meaning of utopia, also as a perfect place, which will come in the future. This is from Tel Aviv. This is from the 60s, a park that deliberately combined architecture, also elements of cultura with nature, with elements of natura, to make a unity, a holistic gestalt, an entire shape, which looks also harmonic, which looks beautiful, to address these notions. On the right hand, we have the utopos, the utopia, in the second meaning, where people cannot live. And this is a photo I took from Frankfurt Main Airport. This is a logistic landscape. And this is an infrastructural / logistic landscape. But this is no landscape, but it's a non-place. And this is a common environment of us today. These are non-places, as the anthropologist Marc Auger has it, that we are living majorly in non-places. Let me continue. And then the next point is a reimagined city has to consider the aspect of community. Reimagined cities have to tackle this question in the end. And we cannot rely on technology alone, because this smart city approach, it has many meaningful aspects, no doubt. But from the mindset, the smart city is an individualist issue. I, the individual, can use the city in a smart way via the help of technological means. This is an individual consumption of the city environment. Where is the community here in these considerations? And therefore, I wanted to refer here also to a basic assumption of our cultural heritage of the human being. This is Aristoteles as a zoon politikon, as an animal, a zoon, is an animal living in the polis, in the city. No matter how beautiful this city is, no matter how it is designed, it is a polis. This means it is, in the positive sense and as an intention, as an ideal space, it is a polis which is resilient and self-destined. The citizens of the polis are making their own fate, are making their own future. And the zoon politikon, and this is very interesting in terms of mindset, the zoon politikon has a bios, an active life in the polis, opposed to other living creatures which are zoein, like zoology, which are just living, cats and birds, but the human being has a bios in the polis. And this is very important, if we want to consider reimagined cities, again, for which kind of human beings we want to reimagine and to rebuild our cities. Okay, the next point is, what is about the existing, I called it, as a metaphor, I called it ecosystem due to its encompassing character. What is with the recent neoliberal ecosystem? Because in this very system, this neoliberal large environment we cannot evade, we cannot escape, we are all embedded in, has nothing to do with communities by its very evolutionary drive and by its very mindset, also by its core basic assumptions. This is anti-community. And what about reimagining cities in such an ecosystem? The next point is konkrete Utopie. This was a saying from German philosophers. A konkrete Utopie means it makes no sense speaking about reimagined cities if this basic condition, this neoliberal ecosystem, is not considered. And then we are playing with words, like Hermann Hesse Glasperlenspiele. So dreams, utopian dreams, how a city could look like for an ideal community. But what about the reality of this neoliberal ecosystem? How to implement really new cities and really new concepts in an entire socio-economic and socio-cultural ecosystem that not just caused the climate change, this is at a piece of the iceberg, but that hinders from its very conception the idea of communitas, of a community. Okay, next point. Yeah, here we have an example, and this is how we work at our Idle Spaces working group. And this I meant with symbolizing space and using spaces as symbols. This is an advertising from the A4 Milano-Venezia Autostrada on a resting place. No? This is an advertising for a region. We, the liberated individuals, technologically equipped and smart as we are, we can use, and this is a mythos also, we can use the world as an application, as an app. Also the world is at my hands, ready for consume for the technologically equipped individual, the consuming individual. And here we have a virtual world, so we have a fictive landscape of the region, but it is fictive, and nevertheless it's a virtual world. This fictive landscape with historical authenticity, with even local indigenous people are making local handicrafts, also like this man with the, I don't know the English expression, with this iron, no? Means in the imagery of this world to get consumed, there have been even used older technologies to make this world more believable, more world-like. It could be really real, no, but it isn't. No? Okay, I will do. Here, as an opposition, also we have a reimagined city as a real community according to this criteria of Marc Auger of the anthropological place. Also reimagined cities, if they are for communities, need anthropological places, means places generating identity, generating belonging, and places having a history. This is an example. This is the Campo, also the main place in the city of Siena. So, okay. This is my last slide. Here we have it. Okay. Here we. yeah, clear. You may read it. This is my fazit. Thank you very much.
But I need the point, I need the clicker. Thank you. Sorry? Yeah, do you hear me? Hello? I think I can't do anything. Now working? Super. Apparently it works. All right. So, good morning, everybody. It's super nice being here. It's my first physical event since March last year. I have been waiting very long for that. So I appreciate that you're all here. I appreciate the kind introduction, and I appreciate that ECC kind of had the courage to set it up. So this is really great. I kind of have my laptop here just to be a bit more on time, because I tend also to kind of overdo it. So mind a strange setup. So it's actually super exciting to listen and kind of also compare my own line of thought with the kind of great book which Ellen introduced and with the two speakers previously. There's a lot where we at least touch the same same topics and have quite different viewpoints on it. So maybe just firstly, repeating numbers we are all knowing, but I kind of constantly repeat them for my own work, but especially with my students. So the numbers we're looking at, they are kind of huge, right? And the problems we are facing kind of of globally, they are very dynamic, they are very kind of drastic, and the field of architecture, when we look into terms like sustainability, we clearly understand it's an urban problem. So we all know the figures. 2007, for the first time, more people in urban than in rural areas. We have seen great kind of exhibitions from Rem Koolhaas, and also the Planet City project by Liam Young, which is proposing that if we kind of cluster all the people in one city, we would just occupy 0.02% of the space, and what's then happening with the rest. So these are kind of challenging thoughts in a way for my own work, which is quite connected to computational design methodology and quite connected to technology, which has been kind of viewed with a critical lens, which I appreciate very much, because I think when we look into kind of technology, or in my own work, it's not about the fanciness or the kind of possibilities, what we can do actually with technology, rather much more also learning from what has been developed like in the 60s, how have been people viewed it previously, and what have been the radical ideas so far, why can't we kind of, or why haven't we taken up with them? So if we're looking at this map, I'm based currently in Finland, and I'm based in a spot which would then probably kind of in blue and not in green anymore. So these are the kind of future scenarios if we are imagining the kind of whole northern ice shield is going to melt. And these are the things when we're looking into kind of rethinking or shaping the cities of our future. It has a lot to do with relocating people, or maybe giving up some kind of old understanding of cities, or maybe just totally reimagining how are we living in these times where certain changes are also communicated quite differently. So the numbers which are communicated by the recent kind of reports is something that, depending on how much we are managing the 1.5 to up to 10 degrees of temperature range, we are talking about either 30 centimeters or then maybe 60 centimeters of sea level rise. But then the numbers actually, if we are kind of not managing them, the scientists are kind of looking into 6 meters of sea level rise. So, right, so there's a lot of kind of difference in simulations, in kind of understanding, and also relying on let's just hope that we are kind of doing a good job in the future. And this is a bit kind of sometimes for the work when we are looking into, my field is in the interface between landscape architecture and urbanism, is kind of, could be a bit, let's say, hindering, but on the other hand, I think it's a great challenge to just rethink totally differently. What is this kind of strange border between, let's say, a city and nature, and what comes behind that kind of linear approach? And should we not just kind of maybe make total new kind of viewpoints of how do we actually understand this linear approach, maybe more into, let's say, a more dynamic or process-oriented thinking. And we are all aware that we have, with this anthropocentric view, we have kind of started the 6 biggest distinguish of kind of flora and fauna in the world. In our kind of profession, I'm now talking about architects, we are kind of taking roughly half of the raw materials existing on the globe for our construction. So there has been quite of a shift in the way how we are handling and how we are viewing the systems and the relationships between the kind of global thinking. And it has been mentioned already twice, this kind of sustainable and smart, and I found it's very remarkable how we are relying on diagrams in our world. So I'm like, we are trying to solve complex problems in terms that we are clustering them into certain kind of containers, I would call them. And if we feel that we are not having the right answer to, let's say, what's in the core, it's sustainability, we are just adding another layer of circles around it, and they might be humanitarian, technology, or other kind of points. And then suddenly it becomes a smart development model, and if these might not be enough, we then probably just add another circle and another circle and another circle, right? So I mean, like, that's of course one strategy how we can deal with it. And I strongly think that this, when we talk about technology, that we need to have a different take on it, that we kind of need to have a lead and kind of envision it from a much more, let's say, challenging point of view, from a much more maybe also aesthetical point of view, as when it comes to the smart sustainable development models where we talk about ecosystem services, green and blue infrastructure. Quite often we look into performance-based architecture, and for me performance does really not kind of equal livability and leaves a lot of aspects kind of outside of the circles, which are actually the beauty and the joy why we are kind of having fun living on the globe, and also would like to kind of be here in the future. So, and in a way how we can tackle this kind of problems perhaps differently is that unfortunately I'm not having any kind of new solutions here for you. I'm just looking into things which are around, learning from other disciplines, and kind of figuring for my own work that nothing we are able to kind of identify in terms of problems can be solved from a singular perspective. So this interdisciplinary, multi-trans, or whatever kind of XX disciplinary words we are creating, a bit similar to adding another circle around it, maybe should be taken a bit more meaningful. And I kind of really learn a lot from the collaborations with ecology, understanding that basically everything is connected to and related to everything else. And this kind of comes also a bit maybe what has been just previous kind of looked at when we talked about myth, or this kind of thinking that it's the green in the city. But I think we have actually in our capacity as architects, landscape architects, urban planners and designers, we can kind of do more. And it's in a bit like resetting the question. It's not a bit like in a way like how can or what can technology do for us, but it's more like what do we actually have to do when we cannot control nor can we predict anything. So how to sustainable evolve this kind of socio-technical systems we are talking a lot about in the future. And I feel that it was brought up by Stefano in the first kind of, when you looked into the book of what you're saying, Ellen, that you want to kind of break up the systems, which I found super exciting, because if we look into this kind of business model of system thinking, it's all about like that there is generally an overlay of systems, right? I mean, like none of these systems kind of globally or even universally kind of function alone. There are elements which are in between, and I kind of get excited in looking into the borders of these systems and into the permeability, and kind of just rethinking that we can actually create them differently, and then looking into the intersections and what's actually happening in there. And I think that's the key point in order to understand it from a rather, let's say, clustering point of view, working with complexity. We kind of should have a very kind of site-specific understanding. So I'm taking you for a short second up to Finland. These are some images just outside where I work and live. And you see that the geomorphical kind of structure of these places evolved over kind of centuries, and is able to kind of adapt to the changes, and also kind of give signals into the future. And these kind of patterns, they are part of this kind of large-scale processes, right? Like when we look here into the Mississippi watershed work from the US, it's one of the biggest. And when we understand the problems in New Orleans when it comes to flooding, where let's say kind of like river-based systems just hit in with a total different time scale than, for instance, local kind of challenges when there are different kind of tsunamis or other kind of events, is that quite often the solutions we are proposing to these adaptive or resilient cities are not taking into account that we're talking about a huge network, and then we're talking about a network which is kind of really kind of slow in time, but which actually works up on the kind of very simple rules which can help us to come up with design ideas, proposing an adaptation in a process-oriented and dynamic kind of network. And these are the things, just to conclude very shortly, which we have exhibited also in the Palazzo Morra, which are showing a couple of ideas. None of them, it's difficult, they are neither utopian, nor a myth, nor a vision, nor a concept, nor a solution. They are kind of humble strategies to be explored, kind of testing out different solutions in order to actually look into how can we rethink a singular understanding of a discipline through combinations of new ideas. And at this stage, I would like to just give credits to my amazing colleagues from Aalto as well as from SUTD, through which we have been actually looking in just coming away from this linear thinking. Like here in Helsinki, there's a new harborfront area to be developed. You see in the circle the planner's vision of a very kind of rather separated approach. And we have been looking into something where we can work with, let's say, the information we are getting from, let's say, the changes over time, the kind of sea level rise, the wind conditions, the dynamic behavior of people, and how can that result into an architecture which is not a finished architecture, which gives ideas for, let's say, a dynamic bottom-up strategies to be explored, and which are giving, in a way, a starting point for a future-oriented understanding of a city, how that can evolve and also eventually sustain over the challenges I have been mentioning at the beginning. And these, I think, are super important questions, as we see here in Chile quite often. These kind of very fragile areas in river deltas are the areas to be developed. And quite often the proposed ideas are very kind of not allowing actually for a sustainable understanding of living there. So how can we get away from this anthropocentric point of view and maybe propose something which is beyond a traditional understanding of a city and a built environment, but rather works with the forces, with the sedimentation processes over time, in order to actually envision something which is beyond a traditional understanding of architecture and language, how we are looking in a way to interact with the future processes. And these are the works we have been developing and looking into also how can we talk with stakeholders, how can we kind of visualize complex challenges, how can we give them a possibility to actually come beyond simulations, but actually to kind of interact with the patterns and give them some tools at their hands that they understand the complexity in different kind of scales, or in the project here in Finland where a railway track was planned and the kind of whole herding structure of the Sami, of the natives, hasn't been kind of integrated into it. So rather kind of complex problems where we are using a bunch of highly technological solutions, sensor-based technology, AI, and so on and so forth, but nothing what we are proposing in the end is actually kind of fixed. So I feel we can do much more than visionary fiction in our kind of field, and I think the only way how to do that is probably through a shift in awareness culture and attitude. And I think I strongly agree with Liam Young when he said, like, the climate change is kind of a cultural change, so it needs to start in our heads rather than in solutions which are technically kind of driven. But obviously, I'm very excited in kind of designing the tools which help us to kind of understand the challenges firstly and then propose solutions. And that kind of concludes with, I feel that something going into the direction of Umwelttexture, where we understand that architecture is part of the Umwelt and benefits from nature, kind of needs to be seen from an anthropocentric point of view in order to kind of be here for much longer than we are currently thinking we can be. So thank you very much.
Thank you, It's working? It's working. Thank you, Lucia. Thank you, Hadi. And I would like to start by expressing my happiness to be part of this face-to-face forum, communicating and sharing the idea with you in person after the COVID pandemic prevented us from doing so in the past changing our perceptions, way of living, influencing and changing in a major way how we meet, work, teach, travel, etc. But more especially the concepts and idea that will form from now on guide the new resulting architecture of town planning, architecture and town planning. After listening to all of you, I'm realizing that I'm going to take you to the basics of the reflections of reimagining cities, because this is the situation in Lebanon. It's about resiliency of people after all what is happening and happens all the time. So I hope I could speak about ideal spaces and future in a different way, but this is the fact, and this is what we are living in Lebanon. So I'm going to start with them. So on August 4, 2020, at 6:08, time stopped in Beirut. A gigantic blast caused by 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate exploding in Beirut ports, resulting in widespread... sorry, I forgot. Where? On the yellow. Okay, so it's time stopped in Beirut. People lost their lives. The blast devastated Beirut and damaged up to 20 kilometers, building up to 20 kilometers away. 217 lives vanished like candle, snuffed instantly by a violent wind, while more than 7,000 people were injured. The blast displaced 300,000 people. Lebanon is no stranger to the contradictory successive periods of wars, followed by periods of peace, reconstruction, and prosperity. While we all agree that peace, prosperity, and reconstruction are not only desirable but essential to the development of the country and its society, yet it can have serious issues. Lebanese architects have been striving for a long time to preserve the identity of the urban and social fabric which form the culture, heritage, and identity of Lebanon's city. Many of us lead a nearly continuous struggle against unscrupulous and influential developers who are unrelentingly working to tear down heritage buildings to replace them with much more lucrative high-rise developments, projects that would eradicate the heritage buildings and cultural, social identity of the city. This is the blast before, and this is the port before and after. And this is the situation in Lebanon, different than the horizontal and vertical situation that you talked about. It's a chaotic, I call it cacophony of buildings. It's chaotic, not clean cut. Anyway, in an effort of instill in the younger generation the passion of preserving their cultural heritage, I have been for many consecutive years giving my second-year student at the architecture department of the Lebanese University, a project repeated every year because of its importance in raising the awareness of the students to the urban context. Every year, a street in a traditional heritage neighborhood in Beirut urban context is studied in detail in the architecture design workshop. The project is divided in 4 phases. The last one being a building design after studying all aspects: social, morphological, typological, aesthetic, and material integration. Throughout those years, we witnessed the transformation of the urban tissue. This is the work of the students, the morphological, aesthetic, everything that all over the years. It's not one project. This is some example of studying each the street. So throughout those years, we witnessed the transformation of the urban tissues. Towers replaced the traditional cluster of buildings with its residual public space, losing as a result the identity of neighborhoods. Large avenues dividing the cities and creating a segregation of communities and loss of communal public spaces. And the gigantic explosion of Beirut port formed a real coup de grace to all these efforts at the end. From the economical point of view, Beirut port is the hub around which the more traditional neighborhoods of Beirut were built and where the rest of the city flourished. Consequently, there is an urgent need to find solutions to rebuild it. From the social point of view, due to the destruction, the economic crisis, the impoverished and absent state and its institution, and scarcity of international funds, displaced people cannot return to their houses, which should be the safest place, the refuge. Unfortunately, many died or were wounded in their homes. From the architecture point of view, the deflagration damaged old and new. The superposition of layers upon layers of city texture, of heritage building and more modern structure, which formed the reading of the city's evolution through the ages. This explosion whet the appetite of the developer further with the new potential of tearing down the most vulnerable, the damaged heritage buildings. With that, the danger of losing the character and identity of the city have increased tenfold. To prevent such acts, Parliament promulgated a law concerning the affected area aimed at preventing greedy investors from enticing the needy owners of the damaged building who, unable to restore their homes, would consider selling their properties. While the intent of the law is clear, its implementation remains doubtful and risky. Shocked by the horror of the catastrophe that befell the zones, I cannot both. Shocked by the horror of the catastrophe that befell the zones surrounding the port immediately from day one after the explosion, and from all over Lebanon, people rushed in a surge of solidarity and humanity to rescue of the deeply wounded and scarred parts of town, defying the pandemic and the deep problems, economic problems affecting the country. It started first as an disorganized manner through sheer personal initiative. Volunteers of all groups, ages, university students, housewives, shopkeepers, professors, architects, engineers, doctors, everybody. Indeed, people from all professions, religions, and regions joins hand in an effort to fill the void left by the state institution, which seemed dumbfounded and paralyzed, remaining largely ineffective, inefficient, and conspicuously absent. Then quickly groups started to form and organize their efforts in more focused fashions. The number of active bodies involved in the rescue efforts was impressive. The Order of Engineer and Architect decided to act as an organizing body, announced an emergency plan, and launched a wide field survey of the damaged area. More than 350 volunteer architects and engineers and university students started to take stock of the affected building with detailed reports about the degree of damage sustained, the structural stability of buildings. I'm going fast because I'm afraid of the time. I have time. Can I slow down? You can slow down. Take your time. Okay. Okay. So I'm. So this is an example of the buildings that were at least rescued for as structure. It's not rebuilt or nothing, but first aid for the buildings. So an electronic survey unit was created, which after receiving its data from the people on the ground was able to filter the information through a data analysis group, which transferred the data to GIS maps and issue the only week report on a master plan showing the damaged building based on structural engineers and architecture survey live basis. 3,040 properties were detected, surveyed, and reported in the affected area. A committee was created upon the instigation of the order, composed of the Town Planning Association, the Shaderji Foundation, and representative of all the faculties of architecture in Lebanon. Its main aim was to become a think tank offering recommendation for the future of Beirut and its port. The community, which called its conclusions the Beirut Urban Declaration, presented a set of ideas and proposals that would constitute a starting point working on a national strategy for the reconstruction of the areas affected by the port explosion, simultaneously proposing a national vision on reconstruction and rehabilitation of heritage, of protection of the social fabric. This is some of the picture. These are the students of the Lebanese University. The subject of the collective memory of Lebanese people became the field of the internship of the second and fourth year of the Lebanese University architecture student. Over 2 months, it started as a spontaneous reaction of 50 students, followed by specialized instructors, driven by the need of putting their knowledge and skill to help the town. 2 days later, it became a systematic and organized mission adopted by the Lebanese University. The mission held various aspects ranging from assessing and documenting more than 200 heritage houses, field rescuing missions of work of art in 3 heritage palaces, 3D documentation of around 100 houses, to the follow-up with the contractors working on the urgent rescue mission of the heritage houses. I want to show you some. This is the work of the student in the palace, Sursok Palace, where I work with my team also. I will show you later. But this is how it was. Everybody was trying to work. And this is the photos of the students working on site and on designing and repairing whatever. These are students working as workmen. This is not only architecture. For example, in this palace, the Sursok Palace, which is very prestigious and contains a lot of valuable furniture and a piece of art. The other one was the group from the archaeological department that wrapped to preserve the objects that are because of the explosion were everywhere and the danger to lose them. With the danger to lose them, so not only architecture, even the wrapping of the object here, for example, in Sursok, and this is working on the wrapping and stocking them in some places to be able to reuse it instead of losing it. This is how as an experienced architect, restorer, I collaborated with Monumenta Orientalia from Rome, Italy, which aims at protecting and enhancing the Mediterranean and the Middle East cultural heritage. After the port explosion, I was asked to represent Monumenta Orientalia to do detailed damage assessment drawings, bill of quantities of 3 selected important historic buildings, which are among the most important buildings in Beirut's urban tissue fabric, with the aim of securing funds for the restoration of 3 buildings: the Lebanese National Library, the Bustros Palace, currently the Lebanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Sursok Palace, one of the most prestigious buildings of which the 2 facades were really damaged and tilted then the walls were, this starts from the roof, completely tilted. So I will show you some. These are the photos of, this is Bostros Palace. Look how, because it's vulnerable, it's old, 200-year-old. This is the Bostros Palace. These are the work that we did, BOQ and assessment damage for it. Every element was studied alone, but we are still waiting for funds. It's all over, but the funds are the more important things to work. This is the Sursuk Palace. Here is the one photo. One more, no. Anyway, this is Sursuk Palace, where really we are trying to try to help it, even though it is a prestigious building, not for people, but it's very important to preserve it in the context of Beirut. So in the National Library, we already started working, and the funds are here, and the work is going on, and it's funded from Aleph, and together with the Qatar Foundation, and the work began, and we are almost completing it. While the other two, we are waiting for the funds, and there is also, this is every element, we did it, I like a fichier to be able to restore. This is the facade, and this is the rescue plan, rescue work that is done to at least preserve it from falling until funds come to restore it, really restore it. And we have presented a concept idea. It's not a methodology statement until now. It's just a sketch about how we are planning to reconnect the whole facade together to preserve, to rescue the palace. Anyway, this is Saint Joseph. I finished work here. I did the assessment, the survey, and the 3D model, etc. The 3D, not 3D model, the 3D, should be some, I forgot, 3D model. Okay. I would like to finish, to conclude by this, meanwhile, I will put this video of Saint Joseph in mono. But I would like to conclude with this. One can but admire the street of Paris and the order of its well-integrated building created by Baron Haussmann. One second, just to enter the church. Okay. I stop. No, it's not finished. I stopped this video. I would like to, Haussmann. So, Haussmann's renovation of Paris was a vast public works program. The main concern then was the hygiene of Parisian neighborhoods, which was a necessity and a noble cause at the time. But one forgets to ask what happened to the people who were born, raised, and living in those medieval quarters. The fabric of their life was destroyed by Haussmann's action. Tatiana de Resnay wrote a book, Rose, about an aged woman who spent all her life in one of these streets and witnessed the destruction as a result of Haussmann's tabula rasa. This is the book, and this is the well-organized streets of Paris, but this is the works of restoration in the 1980s. But what about the people? And this is what we are trying to preserve in Beirut, preserve the culture, the social and the cultural, and replace the people in their context, in their original context, and not do the same mistake. Not mistake, but it's an I don't know. Everybody thinks differently. I draw here a parallel between the human consequences of Haussmann's work and the social condition of the inhabitants of the destroyed neighborhood in Beirut. In conclusion, any real hope of healing the city must finally be based on the will of the people to force a political decision and strategy that will work on safeguarding the urban tissue and prevent a demographical change and disruption of the social fabric, ultimately resulting in preserving the identity of the city. And thank you.
Thank you all for the presentations. Wow, this was quite something. One thing, listening to all the presentations, one thing I must agree with Ulrich, there is no universal human condition, or everything is so different, and we need to be mindful of that, of how we think about reimagining cities in very different ways. There are very, very different ways and methods and techniques that all of you brought up. So what I would like is to ask a couple of questions and to get the discussion going. Actually, my first question will be to Divina, since it's still fresh in my mind. This is not the first time that Beirut had its heart completely destroyed, basically. So, and it's not very recent that the whole city got reconstructed. And it was still going on, actually, when this happened, which is quite unfortunate. How? I mean, I guess my question is, the first tendency is always to reconstruct as is. Right, as human beings, we want to reconstruct everything to bring back as is, and maybe this is not even. There's not enough time passed to even think about this, because we really want to go back. But are there lessons learned from the previous reconstructions where new opportunities open up when something like this happens? Do you see that, or it's almost too soon to even think about that? You know what I'm saying?
Maybe it's too soon for this area, but we have the experience in other areas. Like, for example, the city center of Beirut, Solidaire. I don't know if you know about it. Solidaire, of course. This is an example where Solidaire took over the whole area and decided to restore it. But it was restored very well, neat, organized, etc. But it's really empty. So there is no, the plan was not for the people. It's just for the restoration as is, as you said, without thinking of how to, it's a very expensive area, selective area. So the experience is done on other areas because, as you said, it happens all the time. And instead of, this is what I was trying to say, instead of a continuous thinking for reimagining and reshaping and develop and evolve in the city, we have always, as thinker and architect, and we always have a rupture in our continuous thinking of where to go. The rupture come and we go back to think: are we all going to, as is? Of course, we are going to take advantage. I don't know if I can use this word of this to do better, to change, to respond to the need of the people that will be living there, etc. But there is an urgency to bring people back, and I don't know how. It's a course. It's in course. It's between time of bringing back people and rethinking to do better and to replace. I don't know where we will. what we will, how do we will resolve it at the end of this. But we are all putting all our effort, as architect, everybody, thinker, etc., social, everybody is putting its effort to try to do this, find the solutions.
Right. In a sense, it's, I mean, as you say, it might be almost insensitive now to think about it as a opportunity, but similar to Pia's presentation, it's almost sometimes we take things as a reaction to existing. I mean, a lot of Pia, your work is about. I see it at least as a reaction, as a reactive approach to. The ecological crisis, let's say, and how to think in a creative ways to bring these almost again catastrophic, similar to very similar to that situation. So I see a lot of parallels. Basically, although they look on some level it's very distinct, but they are very similar. Ways to think about these approaches, and I will open up very quickly to the public also if there are any questions. But I have a couple more questions just to get the discussion going, and feel free to jump in at any point. Ulrich, when you say there's no universal human condition. And so, on a very basic level, how do you balance that with the fact that we need to be? I mean, we are always talking about inclusive cities and things that are. So it's a very simple question. How can you think about something like that? You know, like between the let's say. Just calling inclusivity basically, and the yeah. Sorry, do you want to hold the mic?
Okay. Yeah? Yeah. Okay. There might be a universal human condition, but it does not matter in our context here. As regards intentions, for instance, to make an inclusive city or to have any other intention for in the direction of a reimagined city, no matter if rebuild or build a new, it doesn't matter here. No? What I said was we have to consider our basic assumptions behind these imaginations about a better city. We reimagine the city via our better plan. It has to be considered what are our basic assumptions underlying the good character of this new imagined city. What makes this city good? More inclusive, more any what. So what we are deserving. This I mean with any what. This is not mean negative. And before we have these specific goals of improvements, as I call them as the goals of improvements, we have to consider what are the assumptions behind the improvements. Also why, as improvement is about progress. And what are our assumptions about the progress that shall take place via our plans and intentions. This is very pragmatic also. Also, I know it from my everyday consultancy work. To explicitly address these basic assumptions, especially when we are dealing with different stakeholders. What are your assumptions of your group? What are your assumptions of the other group? Make it explicit as far as it is possible, because you very soon will encounter difficulties of resistance. Also the people are not overtly speaking about their assumptions, or they never thought about it, which is okay, but you have to address it then. And as regards inclusiveness is I call it a hope. It's a good hope. It could be a guideline also for future imagined cities. That we say, especially when we are confronted with this existing ecosystem, this neoliberal ecosystem, it could be better if there is a chance for real community building, and if we follow this lead idea of inclusiveness more consequently. This would be good. It's an assumption. It would be good. But in doing so, we have to consider inclusive to which end? Inclusive for whom? What shall be the human behavior, the human, let's call it the human standard behavior in this new inclusive city? What makes it inclusive? And this is on the everyday life level. It's a different behavior of people. As like in your case, as what are the high towers and what is the real life for the majority of the people? This is walking around where again? And this we have to consider and to make explicit. Question answer? So, okay.
What do you think about, like in your context?
It's difficult to tell. As discussed, there is no main recipe. Every city comes with its own context, and cities now are more complex than ever. Because of all the risks and the environments that take place, both including the human capital and the built environment. So it comes down to chasing solutions that have to do with bottom-up practices, that have to do with engaging people, with enforcing such processes on the governance level. Not easy sometimes, it's not easy at all. But I believe this is one way to go, amongst many others.
Yeah, I agree. I think also the notion of progress is very kind of, it's different from one place to the other. I think the only unified maybe situation of the human condition was what we see in your work, Pia, in terms of a common response to the climate. I think that's when we were really unified. I think everybody was really locked down. And I mean, from working with young people, I think there's a lot of potential in seeing the notion of progress in their eyes, because it's really amazing how they think differently. I mean, I opened the news yesterday. I don't speak Italian, but I could see there were walks and demonstrations for climate change. Is that I could guess something like that. And I think really there is a generation that is driving a completely different perception of the future of cities. It's possible that what we see as a progress in the Gulf is not really the ideal situation, but maybe something that is more unified, but also learning from lessons and listening to the future generation. That's my take on it.
Before we open up for questions, do you have questions for each other? No? Okay. Okay. And by the way, Stefano is on. Stefano, can you see us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Where's the camera?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. So we can take questions from the audience. Yes, go
ahead. Actually, this is a question to the moderators.
Yes.
What Pia was talking about, I would go back to a talk by Nicolas Sarkozy, ex-president of France, addressing a public. And he said, when I was born 60 years ago, when I was born 60 years ago, Nicolas Sarkozy was saying the Earth's population was 4 billion people. Now it has reached 9 billion people. This is aligned with what Pia was talking about. And so with 9 billion people, the surface of the earth and the area of production of food or whatever is not sufficient for us. We need more earths. The other side of the question is, with robotics and artificial intelligence possibly replacing human beings at work, we are creating a situation of war. Certainly. With the population explosion, with no more jobs for most people, jobs disappearing, jobs changing, and a completely changing horizon of the work force and the way we work. And with the pandemics, there's a big question about, not about reimagining the city, but about reimagining our lives. And so the question goes to you and to Stefano, and maybe then to Pia, about what do you think about the solutions for this? Thank you.
If I want to rephrase the question, so you're saying technology is the problem? In one way?
No, I'm not saying technology is the problem. I am saying technology is not solving the problem.
It's not solving the problem, which let me answer first, and then I'll give the floor to Stefano and Pia to answer. Absolutely, I completely agree with you. Technology alone is not a solution. Technology is just a means for a solution. So we need to be very, very critical of technologies, and that was my whole quote from when you invent a ship, you invent a shipwreck, basically, which is such a good. So whatever we're doing, it has very dire consequences, basically, in terms of technological innovation, and we need to be very mindful of that. But at the same time, we know this is a complete dichotomy, basically, that we cannot progress without technology. And also, what is technology, right? I mean, that's a whole other type of question to answer. I mean, understanding of technology from one person to other is completely varies, and it's very relative term, like what I understand of technology and what you understand of technology, what anybody else is completely. So there's no one answer, but that answers that question, basically, that how to be. That technology is good or bad, or it's doing well, but the most important thing is to be extremely critical of it, extremely overly critical of it, because it's very easy to be driven with technology. It's like we're all like children in a candy store, right? I mean, when we see new things, we just want to experiment with it, and that's why smart cities. Literally, nobody knows what smart cities is, but they just. And everybody's doing smart cities, right? I mean, they talk about smart cities, but there's no clear definition, because we know we like smart. So having said that, again, I really like your question. It's just about being extremely critical and really going with all these other values that's what makes us human and what makes us what makes a place to be livable, basically. I think those are the drivers that technology needs to follow. Sorry, I'm taking too much time, but Stefano and Pia, if you want to join in.
Sure. Yeah, that's a very good question, very complex question also. So maybe an example of the fact that technology is not always, the answer to a big problem is if we look at what happened till recently in terms of response to the pandemic, we see that often the solutions at the urban level were about, hey, why don't we, think or think back again at the idea of the 15-minute radius city, which is the idea of having services and whatever you need as close as possible to your living environment, 15-minute radius city, or the explosion of bike lanes that we see now around in order to cope with the fact that people are not willing to take public transportation anymore. So we need to facilitate individual movement through bikes, possibly, which is not an innovative solution at all. So if we look at the premises of what everybody was talking about, the pandemic is an opportunity to rethink urban spaces, or even our basic needs of our everyday life. We see that maybe the most advanced technological response was Zoom. So smart work, working from home, but we're not really seeing very advanced innovative solutions in terms of technology. So we went back to the human experience, to the human interaction, to empathy, to being close to each other. So I think, and this goes back to what Alan was mentioning earlier, it really comes down to the human needs, and then if technology help like sustain that or foster that, then that's great. Otherwise, it's not that technology needs to be the answer, even for very big problems.
Anything?
Yeah, I can add a couple of words to the points which were already said. So thanks a lot for the question. I like this kind of let's say this. It might not be dystopian, so I think it's good to kind of look into these things. I think I agree on the criticality, but I think from my own point of view as an educator and researcher in the architectural kind of field, for me it has a lot to do with an intellectual challenge in a way which we are facing. So I feel that quite often we are understanding nowadays technology or smart cities as an app-oriented kind of. There is someone developed something, I can use it. It ideally makes my life better, and in an even better thinking, it also is sustainability. So I'm clicking the boxes. And I just think that we need to get back into command. I mean, like that's what I try to explain from the architecture. We have quite a lot in our hands when we kind of think into how to prevent actually this kind of divergence between technology and the humans, and rather think of how can these things come together and how can we envision in a way where technology should go. So in the field where I'm working, I think it's just elemental that our students, the future architects, they do learn scripting, they do learn the kind of basics of how to engage with robotics and all the things which sound unfortunately a bit like fictionary. Because we haven't made so much progress from the 60s and 70s to come up with meaningful actually applications beyond the more obvious ones. So I'm having a very positive notion on technology and the future, because I think otherwise we would be screwed, right? I mean, like if we just think it's kind of like two different parallel streams, the worlds are fusing, the virtual and the real are coming, like into a new terminology, and we just need to find ways how to interact and to adapt and maybe get off this anthropocentric, like human-centered point of view. And then I think I'm super positive. I think we are well off then. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, we have some questions from the YouTube channel. Okay. I have to say that we have some questions always related to technology. Okay. So I'm going to merge them. First of all, we are curious to know if it's possible to, let's say, take into consideration the concept of informality related to technology. So if somehow technology can consider the concept of informality that, as Nadia and Apostolos said before, it's really, really important in order to create connection in the urban planning. And I'm going to also give the word to Divina related to Beirut. If you think it's possible to use somehow technology in order to reimagine the city of Beirut.
Of course, technology. Sure.
Maybe. It's fine. We can. Please.
Sorry.
No.
I have.
No, I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
Please go ahead. Why don't you?
Go ahead.
You go first.
We have time.
Of course, in my presentation, I talked about the Urban Beirut Declaration, which is a reflection group that is working with the Order of Engineers, with the university students. We are all trying to find how to, of course we will use technology, but to use technology we need the funds. This is the problem. We need the funds, we need the state, the institutions of the state to implement whatever we think and use the technology. In our thinking, of course, we are hoping that all this construction, reconstruction, all this period stops, and we have a stable state to live in. But this is what is happening, and instead of thinking thinking of progress and technology, we are thinking of how to survive resilience. It's about resilience in this country, the resilience of a whole people in Lebanon. Technology is, of course we will use it, but how can we implement it is a different. We don't have electricity. We don't have electricity for starting by this. We need the electricity first to, but I don't think everybody is concerned with Lebanon, the NDP, UNDP, etc. And there was a discussion of how can we help people in Lebanon, so how can we send money, etc., whatever, and help people to find jobs, etc. The end, everybody was d'accord, everybody was agreed upon that we don't need new jobs. We just need you to bring us energy, electricity, to be able to work what we have and to make people that have already job to work. Because the person that they already have job, they cannot work because of the lack of electricity. And then we will think about finding job for the other. We just want to work as we are. So I hope that I answered.
Okay. Regarding the other answer, the other question, sorry. First, informality is a notion that comes out of several reasons. We see informality because of lack of planning or bad planning. We see informality because of resistance to maybe some conditions that can be stifling. We see informality in terms of lack of public space or the need for people to socialize outside norms. And sometimes we see informality coming up as a response to a healthier environment somehow, something that replaces the absence of something. So the relationship of informality and technologies is something that has to become a really crucial question, and I really thank you for that question, which brings us back to the first question that we had. Who has control, who has access to technology? And I believe this can bring us back to the original question here, which is, if people that have access to the public space, to the right to the city, or don't have access to all those rights, how can, at the same time, have access to technology and all the elements that come together with it? How is access to technology taken for granted when we see third world countries having, still considering what we think is essential? So I believe access to technology is something that we really have to address. And the awareness of architects, of us ourselves being social agents and being able to communicate what we are doing and how we're trying to help. I see informality as an opportunity. I see informality as a way to approach an open city, an open community, and through that, an open access to technologies, or even better, to make people that have access to technology or control that access to be aware of the consequences and the risks to that.
I like what's been said. Thank you.
Okay, we can have, I think, one more, or are we?
Questions from the audience? Chief, one for physical audience. Yes.
Maybe one last question. Yeah.
My question is, before you said, if you think about, let's say, the city or all the talks you had about the ecosystem and how everything is connected, and also now you mentioning access to technology, I wonder how, let's say, political involved you as architects or designers you should be at that stage, what your take is on that in general.
Would like to take this?
I couldn't actually hear
can
it
you,
very
can
well.
you rephrase the question, please?
Yeah.
The question is how politically involved or how political you think you should be or can be as architects or designers, considering how interconnected everything becomes or is.
Yeah, how political?
We should be as architects, yes. Yeah.
Anybody would like to? Yes.
How politically, we have the experience of the lack of politically what can do in Lebanon. It's the problem of the lack of politically involvement. What the consequence of the lack of this, we are experiencing it.
It's a good question. When we are speaking about the background of your question as regards future developments which are real already, and if we are speaking about place-making capabilities of architecture as such, from this background, it's unavoidable that an architect should have a political responsibility. I say should. It can be in demand also, an aim that architects are not just some people making idle spaces or people working for some mighty development companies. The question is, in the recent conditions, also addressed in your question, in the recent conditions we are living in, how a political responsible architecture could look like, and how is it realistically possible that architects will gain more political responsibility?
I think we're out of time. On that note, I'd like to thank everybody, and thank you for the audience, and thank you, Hadi and Lucia.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for all... I should have to step inside, okay. And thank you so much for all the panelists. I mean, the debate and the conversation could go on more, but I think we are tight on time. So I will wrap up very quickly this morning's session by saying that, yes, technology could be an answer. It could be an answer for that with you and Stefanos. I really enjoyed all the different presentations. I would like to put some points or, like highlight some points and notions that I enjoyed, such as the urban glitch. That could be, we do have urban glitches inside our society, and there is no ideal space in the end that we will have. It is really interesting to hear about, not just the stereotypical image that we have about the UAE, about Abu Dhabi, which is the parade of towers that we have across different cities, different cities in the UAE as Abu Dhabi and Dubai. So it's very interesting to see what happens at the urban level, at the urban scale, and the Tabula Rasa city that you mentioned, which was very interesting. I was very intrigued also by the fact that how all we come together on the aspects of climate change, and how we can use and leverage technology and use them in livability factors for all of our cities. This is the one that mentioned by Pia. And last but not least, of course, Beirut. I do think that preservation of the identity of the city is one of the most important things that we have to look into, and dealing with this with a proper, by looking at the community of the people and having people at the base of the intervention. So for that, thank you, Divina, and I thank you all. We see you in 1 hour after lunch, for 1 hour in lunch. We'll resume exactly at 2:30. So there's coffee here, starting 2 till 2:30. So please, you're welcome to have a quick lunch around. And yeah, see you at 2.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye.